What is poppin'? It is the Slapton. I am but a lowly Slapton riding these refi waves. And this week in refi, where we give you all of the refi news that is fit to go ape wild over. Of course, with me is the man with the plan, the man with the perpetual summer tan, the man who spent his day dissecting code so he could show his CTO what a smart boy he is, Sir Rez.
Hello, it's me.
Do you want to talk about that real quick? We started this conversation off recording, and you
Oh
were
yeah,
telling me what you were doing. Tell everybody about your morning. What big brain shit you getting into?
currently dissecting a rewards contract in order to understand how to borrow, let's say, a bunch of very good ideas. Mm. Aave has a cool rewards contract, and I like it. That's about it.
And that's why you're the big brain, also known as nerd. No.
Yes, I am. I am a. What is that? Like a gold star nerd. I just nerd every day.
I love
It's
it,
my
man.
personality.
I love it. I'm surrounded by nerds, and I've never been happier. All right,
Nice.
man. So if you want to nerd out with us, if you want to be part of the nerd crew, and you want to work in refi, have I got a job board for you, my friends? RefiJobs.com launched on a new URL last week. We have Grant Trahan of Cause Artist, who has taken over the duties of this fruitful and generative, fecund, I would say, endeavor. Have you ever heard the word fecund?
I have. I've never Googled what it means,
Prolific.
but
Yeah.
sounds smart
See, you
and
you
kind of
you do the
dirty.
code. Yes. I'll come up with the academic, dirty sounding words, and together it'll be a partnership. Anyway,
Okay.
RefiJobs.com curated jobs in the refi space, personally curated by people who know what they're doing, free to join as a job seeker, and you can nerd out with us. And hey, maybe one day you watching will have a conversation about fecund and Aave contracts with Rez and I. Does that sound good, Rez?
Yes, sounds great.
I was waiting for you to say no. I don't want that.
No, I just want to. I want to keep talking about complex systems forever. Like that's my jam.
Well, we've got plenty of complex things to talk about today, and we could start with this complex and I would think very germane, and I would think actually a story of gravity, and it's gold standard and partners start work to define future of digital carbon market. Gold standard is a voluntary credit registry. I would call it the little brother or sister to Vera. In wrestling, I'm a professional wrestling fan. Rez, do you ever watch professional wrestling?
No,
Okay, yeah,
not at all.
because you got better things to do.
I'm reading white papers.
You're reading white papers, and I'm watching Marty Jannetty and Shawn Michaels in WrestleMania 2000, whatever, 1994. Anyway, so in a tag team, the lesser of the two wrestlers is called the second banana.
Okay, that's a nice term.
I'm gonna call it gold
Okay.
standard the second banana in the
The
voluntary
second.
carbon registry space, and they have solicited. I shouldn't say that. They're now talking to organizations about the path forward, kind of like what Vera is doing. And we've got a list of the people involved or the organizations involved, which on the screen right now: American Carbon Registry, C3 Cayman Ltd. We have Flow Carbon, we have First Climate, we have Hedera, we have KlimaDAO, Moss.Earth, Toucan Protocol, to name a few. Cerez, what do you think about this news?
Best news ever. I mean, oh my god. So a bit of context about like the history up to now. Our good friends at Vera, they stopped all tokenizations at some point. Gold Standard, I think, very explicitly just said, please don't tokenize our stuff. We don't like it from the start. And so nobody really took them like tried to call their bluff or anything. They just were like, okay, we're just not gonna touch it. And well, Vera still hasn't like really collected any comments yet. I don't think. While Gold Standard actually now put together a working group to investigate how do we get on-chain things to work? Like, what are the requirements? How do people working in the industry feel about it? And I think that's very beautiful. And I hope something great comes out of this. And honestly, This news made me view gold standard in a completely different light, and I'm happy about that.
What is best case scenario for you? What if, if you could snap your fingers and get best case scenario out of this, what would it look like?
Mm, Gold standard to have good guidelines on what is acceptable and what isn't in terms of working with their underlying assets. Gold standard developing a system in which assets can be moved on and off chain, essentially. That would be very fantastic because that opens up this arbitrage opportunity that makes the carbon market work a lot better. And in addition to that, uh, possibly not the requirement of literally anybody that touches their assets being KYC'd. That would also be nice. Though some KYC is completely acceptable, I think the expectation that, anybody that even holds BCT should be KYC'd is a bit like complicated, and there are smart contracts and treasuries and stuff that necessarily don't fit into that legal model too well.
That would be all bullish news. And of course, we did talk about that last week. We talked about Vera and their interest in KYCing anybody who holds these tokenized carbon credits. You can check last week's episode. Also, hit the like and subscribe button if you find this content engaging, useful in any way. I'm really terrible at saying that. Believe it or not, hate shilling myself, but I do appreciate it. Yeah, so getting back to that, another thing that I thought about, and we touched on this before we went on recording, is if Gold Stero, it's like Vera and Gold Standard together. If Gold Standard wants to emerge from the penumbra, that's another great word, of Vera, here's an opportunity. Because Vera seems to be deliberate in their process, and that's putting it kindly. Gold Standard is, in a way, beating them to the Vera's punch already, right? Vera said we're going to have this working group going on, and Gold Standard's already doing it. If they come to market and they have these clear guidelines, and the guidelines, to your point, are more sensible and reasonable and more in line with the values of Web3, could it be possible that Gold Standard could then surpass Vera, at least in this space, and maybe even take that momentum and be the number one chain? Or number one registry?
I honestly believe that they can. So here are some reasons for that. Currently, Gold Standard is, I believe, the second largest in terms of the kind of demand that they see. I can't, off the top of my head, comment about like the sizes of the outstanding inventory or stuff like this. But the voluntary carbon market does view Gold Standard as sort of this like premium Vera. So there's a small markup on Gold Standard credits in general compared to Vera. Gold Standard will tell you this is very well justified because their accounting practices in their methodologies are a bit more conservative and a bit more require a lot more proof. There are trade-offs there. Obviously, it's not that black and white, but Gold Standard is viewed in a very good light already in the carbon markets. So I think the additional demand lever that they could get from crypto if they pull this off very nicely could very easily catapult them into being first. I seriously do believe it.
Are we Team Gold Standard right now? Are we rooting for them? Is this the hero we need but don't deserve?
I'm going to hold off on commenting before either of them put out any real guidelines. I think there is a difference between allowing people to talk and listening to them. And I think I don't know the people behind either registry as much as I can, so I could comment on their intentions or how they think about things. So I guess the proof will be in the pudding, like put something out, let us see it. What do you really think?
Proof is in the pudding, baby. And I'm going to, so one more thing that we can putting out there, you like that? Is this story right here, which is maybe not as bullish as the last one. India to stop carbon credit exports until climate goals are met. If we could put like a sad trombone sound effect, maybe I will put that in post. This might be that to kind of kill the momentum of the last story. What can you tell us about this, Sir Rez?
monster yikes, like the biggest yikes on the planet yikes. This is um so essentially, India has been working on their own internal carbon market framework. They've been passing laws and moving towards this direction. And out of thin air, like nobody in the carbon markets was expecting this at all, there just came up this sudden announcement that, hey, we are banning all exports of carbon credits from India. And nobody understood what that meant at all. And everybody continues to be confused. And it's very problematic. We can go into more detail.
I would love to. So I was actually spending last night listening to a Twitter live. I forgot who it was. There were people from India discussing this very thing. They're going quite in depth, and it sounds like a cluster, and it sounds like a lot of lack of clarity. And India is a very populated place, right? They've got billions of people, and every government has its challenges. It seems like India in general, like their government has a hard time getting on the same page with things like crypto. They ban it every other month, and carbon credits, it seems like it's the challenge of coordinating billions of people, right? So that's what it kind of felt like to me. And in a lot of people, like people who don't know India, and I'm not an expert on India, is you think of it as one country, as we tend to in the Western world, but India is a diverse population of languages and ethnicities and cultures. Like, it is incredible. How many languages exist in that country, right? So then you have like very province specific method practices in terms of carbon credits, and it's like it's incredibly complex. But what would you add in terms of the details?
Yes. Background context. When it comes to at least the Vera registry, since I'm quite intimately familiar with the kind of data that's on there, we can say about 1/3 of all carbon credits in the Vera registry originate from India. A bit less than 1/3, but somewhere around that area. They have massive issuance. They have issued historically a bunch of credits, and there are a bunch more to come. And they are one of the biggest beneficiaries when it comes to the international movement of capital following carbon credits, right? Because you have a bunch of these companies in India doing carbon projects, earning a lot of money off of them, selling them to corporations in other countries. That's kind of the dream of carbon credits when they were conceptualized, the CDM registry, all of that. The whole goal was, hey, there are these developing countries, and we can support people in developing countries while also doing climate positive things. These are like not, conflicting goals at all. We can do both. And it seems to have been working out for quite a while. And I have a lot of worries. The main worry is India creates, again, a lot of carbon credits. If the idea is that these carbon credits should only be consumed by their own internal market is not able to hold up this amount of volume that exists already in the voluntary carbon market. Like, where is this money coming from? I have no idea. Second point, their current regulation is not mandatory offsetting. It is still voluntary. It's just, now voluntary inside of one country. It's not good. And the third thing is that there are these really large corporations in India that run carbon projects as well. And they have made like a few comments saying that it's not that bad. I'm honestly unclear on this. Because the statement is like, well, maybe they mean that the credits generated by this scheme can't be exported. And it's no. According to the Article 6 stuff we've been talking about in the past few episodes, if you all remember this, in order for voluntary carbon credits to be legitimate, they now will be needing government approval that these carbon credits can actually be used in other countries, because the host country, the home country of that carbon credit, needs to go into their carbon credit accounting book and explicitly remove it from there. But the whole announcement was, we are not allowing exports until we meet our climate goals. So... Really? And It's less worrying maybe when we're talking about renewable energy credits, since they're relatively cheap and the unit economics of creating them clearly at this point is like it's mostly a free add-on if you can get it at all. But when we're talking about things like reforestation, these things have huge upfront economic costs, and they might have ongoing economic costs. And if your internal market is not capable of holding up these costs, is not able to appropriately, return value to the people that put in the money in the first place, these reforested areas are going to see reversals. We're going to see them chopped down. That is also incredibly bad because if a project becomes like completely economically unviable, the only scenario that can happen is reversals. It's worrying. It's really worrying, and I hope we get more clarity. Apparently, there was supposed to be more clarity next week, so fingers crossed. But it's not looking good. It's possibly like the weirdest, most fucked up news the carbon markets has seen in a while.
Yeah, no, good point. Yeah, India is a monster in terms of these carbon credits, reforestation, and then my understanding is that there's a lot of agro, like cotton, like those sorts of practices, right? You can do like more green agriculture, and then you can get credits for that. I know India grows a lot of cotton. Are you familiar with that?
Well, I'm a bit more familiar with the regenerative agriculture carbon credit market, and honestly, it's still very young and developing, so that I don't anticipate that being a huge source of problems.
Okay.
But I think people like Indigo Ag, who's like one of the carbon credit like project creators. They've been working really hard of getting a VM42 Vera project up and running in India, and I'm unclear of is all of that work and investment and like building up the infrastructure now for nothing?
Because India can say, hey, guess what? Those credits, they're not going to market.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's ours now. Like
Right. So that Article 6, which we, turned out to be something worth knowing, is rearing its ugly head. And I hate to say ugly, but I mean, but Article 6 also has its benefits, right? Because it prevents predatory projects from going into indigenous lands and extracting value from the host country. But now you're seeing maybe a negative side of it, where if a country is too heavy-handed with their Article 6 and they're stifling the ability for these projects to make money by selling them overseas, then the thing collapses.
Yeah, it won't happen. Like, financial additionality is a hell of a drug. Like, if your project actually needs functioning finances to stay up, then like taking that away, logically it follows that it collapses. It's not good. And it's very worrying. We're kind of seeing a government maybe doing a rug pull in real life to all of these like nice project proponents. That's not great. I'm not happy about that.
Indeed, we will keep you posted on that. So a little bit more dour news. We have a little bit. Let's lighten the mood with this next story. We have the Toucan protocol is officially launching on the. I say Celo, but I hear people saying Celo. What do you say, Rez?
I think I would also say Celo.
You say Celo. I say Celo, but I also say Toucan, and most people say Toucan. Anyway, we have Toucan Celo partnership going on, and for those who don't know, Celo is a blockchain, and it is positioning itself to be the home of ReFi. There are many homes of ReFi. We will get into this, but one of the homes of ReFi, they are giving a lot of money away. They are incentivizing people to use their chain. Toucan Protocol, of course, is one of the OGs in this space that was responsible for BCTs, NCTs. They and Klima, in my humble opinion, kickstarted this whole ReFi space. So they are launching on Celo. What do you think of this? What are your thoughts?
I'm happy to see Toucan like executing on their vision of being everywhere, because I think that's part of the value ultimately of carbon credits is you kind of do need to be available on different chains, so the protocols that are on that chain can actually consume your asset and become carbon neutral. That's definitely, I think, a value add, and if they keep doing this, I think it's a very strong market position to be in. In
Any
general,
any downside, let's
yeah.
say, to being on Celo? I know that I've heard rumblings. I've heard people in the space that are upset when liquidity gets, let's say, fractured or decentralized, and if because another chain that has a lot of TVL, particularly a lot of green assets, would be Polygon,
Yeah.
right? So some people say, well, just put it all in one chain. All the liquidity will live in one place. This is a this is a budding space that needs all of the lifeblood it can get. Let's not fracture it. Is there validity to that?
I actually think that there is, but there are some mitigating factors, perhaps. I personally believe in like the wheel and spoke model of, you have this like central point where it has very deep liquidity, and then you can have a bit shallower liquidity or a lot shallower liquidity if you're using concentrated liquidity. Words. I really just like Google it at this point.
Yeah,
We're
right,
going to go
exactly.
into a half-hour tangent on this.
There are
But
YouTube
there are
videos.
ways. Yes, there are ways to like use capital pretty efficiently to get some trading happening on different chains. But I do believe that concentrating your liquidity on one chain makes a lot of sense, and we're going to discuss this I think later on as well. But every time you go on a new chain, you also kind of expose yourself to the specific risks of that chain or that bridge.
Let's do that now. Let's do that now. Actually, I think this is a good.
Sure,
This is a good.
okay.
So let's say I have USDC on Polygon, right? And I want to move it to Celo. Now, what would be the process? Don't give me specific, but like, what would be like the high level process? What would we need? What would we need to do to get it over there?
I think I don't know what it looks like on Polygon. I've done this on Ethereum, so I'm a bit more familiar with
Okay,
that process.
we'll do Ethereum
So
to Celo. Yeah.
yeah, how I would do it on Polygon would literally be I would first turn it into wrapped ETH. I would then bridge that back to Ethereum, and then I would use, I think it was called Portal Bridge or something like this, and then I would move that over to Celo, and then I would trade that on Uniswap or something for maybe Celo. But it's a process where you have to depend on a few key things working properly, and bridges are always this tough spot because we did talk about a huge bridge exploit last week, but also bridges are this interesting thing that have more dependencies than most other things. So when you're using a bridge, what this means is that on one side of this, like on one blockchain, you're locking up resources, and you're getting like a tokenized receipt on the other end that functions like the same token. So when I move Ethereum as wrapped Ethereum onto Polygon, what I think happens in the background is essentially the Polygon bridge has a huge treasury filled with wrapped Ethereum, and it needs to be able to back every single wrapped Ethereum that gets bridged back and redeemed for the underlying asset. The problem here is on both sides there can be very nasty exploits, which would allow people to withdraw assets that they have no right to withdraw, for example. Or, I don't think we've seen this happen yet, but smaller blockchains aren't necessarily also very safe. We saw this on the Ronin Bridge exploit, which was related to the Axie Infinity game, where because the validators in that system got compromised, they could essentially just make the blockchain do whatever transactions they wanted to, which ultimately meant that they just cashed out of everything on the other end by creating fake transactions. And these are just like crazy risks that can happen and are more prone to happen the smaller we go in terms of a blockchain. So if you have a very large blockchain, hard to exploit. Ethereum, I think, is very hard to exploit in that way. If you have a very small blockchain, that could happen to you. And there are obviously ways to mitigate that, but that tends to mean that you have to centralize more and you have to give more power to like a smaller group of people. If you do that, the exploit, angle is maybe not the same, but it still exists. And now you need to just like convince a bunch of people in real life that, hey, let's steal everything, or hey, I accidentally stole your keys or something.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, so I don't know about Ethereum. I know that Bitcoin, when you wrap Bitcoin and like send it to the Ethereum network, what you're doing is you're sending the Bitcoin, the native Bitcoin, to a group of trusted centralized holders called a federation. Now, these are big players in crypto. I don't know who exactly they are. As an example, Gemini, Coinbase, etc. Right? They're these
and they have their home base in the United States of all places.
Right.
So like.
And so then they lock that up, and then they have the assurance that the receipt they're going to give you is completely redeemable, 1-to-1, et cetera. Right. So there's a risk in that in and of itself, right? So the long and short of this is, because blockchains don't play nicely with each other by default. And I always, my way of conceptualizing this is each one is a road, a highway, and they're very good at going in one direction very fast, and they're very poor at connecting to each other. So these bridges are these little side roads, and these little side roads can have potholes and all sorts of problems, right?
Yep.
So, that's the problem with bridging. Whenever I use a bridge, Rez, I am terrified. And I don't do it very often, but I am. And there are a lot of bridges, and some bridges are just outright completely centralized in the sense that there is like central treasury, and they're basically just taking whatever you're putting in, and then they're kicking out whatever you want on the other end, right? And at any point, they can just pull that liquidity. They can just take it. They own it. You gave it to them, and you're trusting them as an arbiter. So that is the risk of this. And it's just a pain in the butt, man. Like, as you described, the number of steps, then you're going to, if you're on certain chains, you're going to get your prices eaten into by fees and things of that nature. Every bridge needs to take a cut. So, that is the downside of multi-chain, and that is the downside of these bridges and of fracturing liquidity. Now, the one advantage I would say, to me, I think the best part about fracturing liquidity is decentralization, right? So now you don't have a single point of failure. If, let's say, Polygon goes down for whatever God knows reason, you still have liquidity on other chains, right? So that's redundancy is good. But
you could definitely argue that,
But back to the original story. Toucan on Celo. Good to see Toucan out doing good Toucan things, and good to see Celo continue to expand. And
Toucan is delivering.
They are delivering. That we'll call them the mailmen, or mail people, to be politically correct. Another partnership is the Spirals protocol. Helena from Spirals Protocol. Helena was on with us last week. Check out that video. Partners with Ivy Protocol. I'm gonna let you take this because you're actually a lot more knowledgeable than I am about everything. This in particular.
What exactly are we talking about? Are we talking about who Ivy Protocol is?
Do you want to give an overview of Ivy Protocol, the crowd, just what it means to crowdsource and all that?
So based on my understanding so far, they came out of stealth like I think last week or the week before that. I've met them before. But essentially on a very high level, they are working to raise capital to spin up carbon projects. So they're helping on the funding side. And I believe the collaboration that they have with Spirals is that Ivy Protocol, I'm assuming through some sort of grants, has a bunch of dollars that they don't need to use immediately on Celo, the word, and they don't need to use it immediately, but Spirals is providing them a method of making that do some public goods in the meanwhile. By using those stablecoins as staking, as I understand, as a validator in the Celo system. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I couldn't correct you. You'd be the one correcting me. No, I think you're right though. Yeah, I think that's exactly
yeah. And then Spirals is using those profits or those gains in order to do public good stuff, which is a cool plan. I mean, a bunch of different crypto projects do have a bunch of dollars on their multisig just hanging out and kind of not doing anything for extended periods of time.
Yeah, well said. Good to see. Good to see Spiral Protocol is doing their thing. Obviously, if we got anything wrong, Spiral's Protocol or Ivy, yell at us in the comments or just in DMs. Just call us names. We're used to it.
Call us names.
All right. Last partnership we'll talk about. Moss adds tokenized carbon credits to Regen Registry. Reached out to Regen Registry a couple weeks back, asked for a representative, some clarification about their registry. Haven't received word from them yet, but I will keep trying. Moss, we know, is Luis Adame and the Brazilian Amazonian rainforest, and they have a bunch of carbon projects. Red Plus methodology is my understanding, right?
Yes.
I believe that's right.
Yep. Conserving Amazon rainforest.
There you go. So now Moss is added to the Regen Registry. So what we were talking about, what I've gathered about the Regen Registry is they have their own native blockchain that they are providing as like a way to you put this word aggregate projects and carbon credits. Is that a fair statement?
I think the highest level understanding that I could provide about what the goal of Regen Network is that they want to be like base infrastructure for a lot of nature-backed assets. So they are building out functions and modules that they expect other projects to be able to reuse on their platform. They're building out consensus mechanisms, a bunch of this other stuff. But they are also essentially a platform where you can bring in your asset, and they're very happy about that. So as I understand, there's now a way to bring the good old MCO2 onto Regen Network. Previously, I think Toucan has also done this with NCT, and there seems to be like this momentum of Moss getting more nature-backed tokens into their ecosystem.
Love to see it. So that is our ReFi news, and we've got a doozy when it comes to our macro news. We'll start with the positive story, Rez. We always start with the positive. That's the way you get anywhere in life. Ethereum merge on track as Goerli test merge.
Yeah, I was wondering what's positive about this news. Yeah. Okay.
Successfully finalized. I don't know how to pronounce Goerli. It could be Goerli. It could be Goerli. Who knows?
Goerli, I think.
Goerli, okay. But this is the last testnet, I believe, or is it the second to last? The last one, right. There were 3, Ropstein, Sepolia, and Goerli. So the merge is still set for mid-September, like a month away, man. Oh my God.
Yes.
And so they, this is good news. What do you expect to see? How into the conspiracies about Ethereum proof of work spinning up as a competitor have you entertained? Like, are you?
I love it. I looked into that, and that seems like the scammiest scam that ever scammed to me.
It's completely stupid. It's complete. Like, we agree with this, right? Like, I'm in a private chat with people. I buy shitcoins of Klima fame. We were both modding together. We were going back and forth, and I was just ripping into this idea of Ethereum proof of work. Like, go ahead. You tell me. Tell me why it's a scam, and I'll tell you why afterwards if we have different reasons.
Yeah, for the people in the nice seats over there. The whole idea is essentially we have Ethereum. You can imagine Ethereum as kind of this database that contains a bunch of assets and who owns these assets. And then in addition to this database, we have this logic layer of, if you put X in, you get Y out and stuff like this. Okay. So Ethereum is moving to proof of stake, which means there are no longer huge hardware requirements for maintaining the system. It's done in a much more energy efficient manner. But there are a bunch of miners out there who have a bunch of these like rigs, and they're very disappointed with the outcome. Their current proposal is that they would like to copy the entire database and create a one-to-one copy of the database, and then assume that everything will be fine. I personally don't see how that's going to happen, and I'm very worried for anyone that thinks this is a good idea, because okay, let's say you have Ethereum. You fork Ethereum as an asset, that's fine. You now have proof of work Ethereum on your proof of work Ethereum blockchain. The problem comes in when we're talking about stablecoins, because stablecoins are backed by real-world assets. So, like USDC, there is a bank account somewhere that's holding like something that looks like cash, which might be bonds or whatever. But we're holding money, and this thing on chain is a symbol. It's a receipt for that money in the bank account. The problem is, if you make a second copy of the database, there's now twice as much money, question mark. So the only logical conclusion is that in this proof of work universe that some specific people are trying to sell, the vision is that, yeah, we'll just create a copy and everything will keep moving as normal. What will actually happen is you get your own personal like copy of like let's say you now have twice as many assets as you did before. It's just some of them are on this like magical proof of work chain now. What's then going to happen is people with their stablecoins are going to buy their fake stablecoins are going to buy the proof of work Ethereum on chain, and then we're going to move it out and sell it immediately. So you just like liquidate all of your assets and sell everything off because the stablecoins that prop up the whole system are no longer backed. That's what's going to happen here, and it's going to be fantastic to watch. And I think this is a terrible idea.
Yeah. So
what do you think?
That's what iBuy is all about. These sorts of plays. So that's we're all in agreement. The first thing, block 1 is going to be liquidate every asset and turn it into Ethereum proof of work. Block 2 will be interesting because it's like, how are you getting off the chain now? What's the like? Oh, yeah. Who's offering the liquidity?
There are a few exchanges that want to provide proof of work Ethereum. So I guess you would sign up to that exchange ahead of time, so you would be ready.
Right. So I mean, essentially, what's going to happen is you're going to have very sophisticated bots. People are going to profit on this. It ain't going to be you. The other thing is, like, from a technical perspective, Vitalik is a smart freaking dude. So he saw this challenge years ago. And the way he is basically making the proof of work chain, if it happens, dead on arrival, is we've already instantiated the Ice Age. So in September, the difficulty bomb explodes on the proof of work side. And the amount of energy and the amount of computation needed to verify transactions is going to go up exponentially. And like, I think it's like within 150 days after that happens, it's unusable. Like, you won't be able to put a transaction through. So what the Ethereum, so automatically Ethereum proof of work, what they're going to say is, we are the incumbent chain. This is what we all agreed upon, proof of work. We are the real chain. That's the fork. But they're going to have to fork to get around this Ice Age, which is going to invalidate their entire claim to legitimacy, because they're going to be forking themselves. It's dead on arrival. So my advice, not a financial advice, my non-financial advice is, do not touch that stuff. It is dumb. And I got so angry, and irrationally so. I'm like, who is thinking of this stuff? Like, and saying, well, this is going to be a real possibility. Ethereum proof of work is going to be like the next chain. It's like, are you that bored that you have to... It's a conspiracy theory, dude. You know, it angers me like that I even have to waste my time thinking about such absurd things. Like, I have better things to do. I watch freaking pro wrestling. Anyway.
Yeah.
We'll keep you abreast of that.
Thank you for that rant. That was a good rant. 10 points.
Dude, I just can't, like, it's like every nerd in crypto is trying to come up with the next, like, wonky scenario to prove how creative they can think about, like, breaking stuff. And it's like, the plausibility of this is zero. Like, are you worrying about an asteroid hitting the planet? It's more likely than Ethereum proof of work becoming, like, the default chain, you know?
Yes.
Anyway. Right.
It's very unlikely, and I think it also shows some sort of something about the intentions, that technically we have a proof of work Ethereum chain already that's gonna stay proof of work. It's called Ethereum Classic. It has a long history of why it ended up like that, which was due to a previous disagreement on how things should work. But
yeah, it exists. You know, I hear you.
It exists. Yeah, it exists. There's no need for a third Ethereum. You know, if you really believe that Ethereum as a proof of work chain deserves to exist and is like more valuable, you should be looking at mining for Ethereum Classic instead of forking an entire like instance and then expecting that to work out. It won't.
Completely agree. All right, our final story, and probably the most fun one. We saved the most fun for last. There's so much to go into, and we're going to have so much fun with this. I just have it on the screen. So Tornado Cash in general. So let's set the scene. Tornado Cash is a way for people, entity, anybody really to commingle their funds with other people's funds. It becomes indistinguishable who put what funds in, but then it pops out to some address the amount of funds that you put in. And in doing so, it obscures identity. If you just want, for the sake of brevity and time, you put money into Tornado Cash and the money that comes out is no longer tied to any particular address. You anonymize that money, right? Would you agree with that? Okay.
There's no transaction history that you can go through and find out like who sent it. So as somebody made this example, and I think it's a pretty good one, a legitimate case for Tornado Cash is that when you send money to your friend, you don't necessarily want them to see everything that's on your bank account. So Tornado Cash is a solution to that of going like, hey, I'll pay you, but you don't get to find out what my address is. That's about it.
Yeah, or what if you want to donate to a cause that's not particularly socially acceptable in your country or in your community, right? You don't want people knowing that you donated to whatever LGBT plus in a repressive locality.
Exactly. It's like anti-censorship in a way. Like you get to have that privacy of nobody knows where this money came from. There's a way to actually Tornado Cash technically does have receipts, so you can like figure that out as the recipient, I think. But no one else can come in and figure out like where did this come from.
Okay, so that's the use case, and it's been wildly popular. Now, to be fair, the other way you can use Tornado Cash is to launder money.
Yes.
And there is no doubt, I would never suggest that there weren't money launderers using this. If I were a money launderer, I would be using this, right? It's the best protocol that I know of. If somehow I ended up with dirty money and I wanted to get it into the real world, I would be putting it through Tornado Cash, and people in North Korea presumably have. I think that's likely.
So the biggest analytics company for on-chain data that services, I think, most centralized exchanges that allow you to, take your on-chain assets and give it to them. They work with this company called Chainalysis, who does the whole anti-money laundering analysis on-chain, and essentially tells you, is this problematic money or not? So they'll flag it for you. I think this is one of their main services. But their analysis showed that almost $1 billion in North Korean money has been laundered through Tornado Cash. That's like their analysis and opinion on what has happened in the past few years.
Yes.
And it's gotten a lot worse very recently, and it's highly problematic.
So what do the regulators do? They sanction this. And they say, if you use this protocol in a certain way, at a certain amount, if it looks suspicious to us, and they have parameters for that, then your funds will be frozen. Your wallet, I believe, will be frozen. Is that? I don't remember exactly what it meant, but basically, you wouldn't have access to those funds, and that would be that.
Yeah, exactly. They sanctioned Tornado Cash and any like affiliated parties. So, by the logic of generally how economic sanctions work, is if a sanctioned entity sends you money, you are supposed to essentially freeze it or reject it or do something like this. But in Ethereum, there's no such thing as accepting funds. You just get funds. So everything's very permissionless.
So this is where we get into the really fun stuff. And my favorite part, Rez, I don't particularly like monetary regulators. I don't like, that's my political bent. I just don't like government in general. So I think what we're seeing now is the government's scrambling to figure out how to sanction something of this nature. It's not Web 2. There's no centralized entity that's behind this.
There's no server.
It's just code. It's code that anybody can access with a front end that can be spun up in a day. So and they can't take it down. So that's why they're saying anybody who interacts with this protocol, your fund, you can't do it, and those funds are invalid, and you have to report them or whatever, or you're going to be arrested. Who knows what? So what's the consequence of this? Well, what are people doing, Rez?
So there's been I think in some terminology we could call this person a prankster. In maybe some other terminology, this person might be some sort of a financial terrorist. I'm unsure. I guess it depends on opinion.
Yeah.
But there's somebody that has been sending small amounts of Ethereum through Tornado Cash to famous wallets that have a lot of money in them. With the expectation that when these people now try cashing out into centralized exchanges, their whole account will get frozen because of this one tainted transaction.
Right, which is hilarious, and it shows the problems of regulation. Now, I think it's way overblown because the regulators have said, if we see $40 worth of money coming through Tornado Cash, we're not going to freeze your entire account. Although I guess they could. They're saying if we see a pattern of millions or whatever, we don't know the threshold, whatever the threshold is, then you become suspicious. But I mean, it just goes to show you that this is uncharted territory because. Yeah. If I wanted to wreck your world, Rez, if I wanted, let's say you had a bunch of money in a wallet, I could send you, and I was very rich, I could just send you $100,000 from Tornado Cash, and you're in trouble. At least you have a legal problem on your hands.
Yeah, I'm basically accused of international criminal offense immediately.
Right. So there's that unwieldy problem. I just mentioned another problem that regulators are going to have is that, if you take down the domain of Tornado Cash, whatever it is now, okay, that's centralized. You can do that. But what's going to stop 10 other people from just putting a new one up? All it is a front end that connects to the contract. And you don't even need a front end if you know what you're doing. So, right. So if you're able to interact with the contract directly, you have some knowledge, you could just use it that way. So this is censorship proof. You aren't taking it down. It reminds me a lot of BitTorrent. How many years, a decade plus, that regulators have tried to take down something like BitTorrent, which is just very similar, decentralized file sharing, and they can't do it. It's a infinitely headed hydra that you put one head down and 10 more pop up. These regulators are going to learn, I think, in this case, what they're up against. And I say this to people who always say regulation's coming, is going to change crypto. I'm not so sure about that. The people that I know in crypto aren't going to just say, okay, the government wants this, let's play nice with them. That's not where the space sprung up from. That's not what people have interest in this space. And they are 100% going to be fighting back in nonviolent ways. That's my humble opinion.
But speaking of potentially violent ways, so there is this vector for regulation that can be implemented when it comes to crypto. We mentioned stablecoins before, because what stablecoin issuers have to do is they have to have a real-life legal entity that holds all of these assets, that is responsible for them, and these organizations can be regulated. You can go after Circle, the people that put out USDC. You can sue them or charge them for criminal crimes or whatever else. You could even potentially sanction them because they are interacting with Tornado Cash with their USDC. That's a potential problem for them. So what they did is that USDC has this option to freeze any addresses USDC, so you can't move it. It's just stuck. You can't transact with it. Effectively you don't own it anymore.
They have a kill switch because they're centralized.
Yeah, they have to have a kill switch because otherwise they would get shit thrown at them infinitely. People would likely go to jail. Not a good deal. So they have to have a kill switch, and they use the kill switch. They kill switched about 50 addresses, I believe, which equal to something like how much money was this? I can't seem to remember. It was.
Let me see if I can find it. It was substantial. Yeah, millions.
Yeah, it was in the tens or hundreds of millions. I can't remember.
Enough to matter.
But it's enough to matter. Maybe $50 million, somewhere in that area. I could be wildly wrong. But the point is, a lot of money got frozen. And this puts us into this very weird zone now of going okay, in what other cases could this happen? It's kind of worrying that there's no legal clarity. The United States government still refuses to put out like good guidelines of what they feel is okay and not okay. Everything gets solved through just
power, brute
suing,
force.
suing people, getting them in court and accusing them of making a security or whatever. And these things play out in court, not in regulations. Like nobody has clarity ahead of time of what's going to count or not. And there are people very worried about this. One of them is MakerDAO.
Yes, sir. I had that story up I had it up, but I'll put it up one more time. MakerDAO founder calls on DAI to drop dollar peg amid tornado cash fallout. So what's the deal with this? Why would MakerDAO want to get away from USDC?
Mm-hmm. A bit of history. MakerDAO's DAI, or DAI, as it's called, is one of the original Ethereum stablecoins. And how it used to work is that you could lock in a bunch of collateral and then borrow stablecoins backed on this collateral. And they would then liquidate assets in order to maintain the peg, but they keep the value of $1 through this mechanism. At some point, they realized that in these market conditions where everybody wants to hold dollars and nobody wants to hold all of these volatile assets, this sort of system struggles with meeting demand. It's very difficult to supply enough stablecoins to this kind of a system if everybody wants to buy stablecoins at once. And as a consequence of this, they decided it was a good idea to allow DAI to be created one-to-one by locking in USDC. Or this centralized stablecoin we just saw, and over time, 60%, somewhere in that area, I think it's 60% of all DAI stablecoins are backed by USDC. So it's essentially extremely dependent on USDC not blacklisting their treasury, because otherwise immediately DAI would become unbacked by about 60%, which would mean everybody that holds DAI just got over 50% poorer. Not a good deal,
right?
At all.
So DAI is saying, hey, USDC, when the regulators put pressure on you, you caved and you did what they wanted. Well, what if the regulators put pressure on you to freeze our accounts? So they're exploring with their community the option of moving off the centralized collateral to a decentralized collateral, which opens up its whole other can of challenges, right? So I think there was one proposal to put it on Ethereum. Now, the problem with putting Ethereum as the backing is Ethereum is very volatile, right? And so you could do things like over collateralize, and most derivatives that are backed by Ethereum do exactly that, but that's capital inefficient. Mm-hmm. But no, it's a very interesting thing that's happening right now. We talked about Frax before, that it is decentralized. It is partially algorithmic. It's partially collateralized. I believe it would be much more censorship resistant compared to something like USDC. Might we see something like the ascendancy of that rise and take over USDC, USDT?
It remains to be seen.
It remains to be seen. We don't know. Yeah. So, I mean, and then there's one more thing we can hit on this is in the Netherlands, the developer, a Tornado Cash developer, was arrested. Now, this is problematic. The entire thing is problematic for me from a legal perspective, because we were saying this before, is never in the history of regulations have we seen open source tech be sanctioned. And never have we seen the creators of open source. I mean, they don't own it. They've created it and put it out there as a tool. Have we seen these people be arrested for their work? As far as I know, it's scary.
Essentially, because you created something that anybody can interact with, you're now immediately liable for anything that anybody does with it. That's essentially the logic that is being applied here, which is worrying just because of this permissionless nature. That developer over there, they can't shut Tornado Cash down. That was never an option. It's a permissionless system. There are essentially no admin keys. There's nothing you can necessarily do that's going to stop. So now the solution seems to be, let's go after the people that actually wrote the lines of code, as if that makes sense. Personally, it seems like, well, in Europe, we don't have free speech in the same shape as the US does. So
USA.
yes.
USA.
In the US, I'm unsure if this could happen because it seems to be infringing on your right to free speech.
Who knows anymore? Like I could make a very compelling argument that you're right, and the government would make a very powerful argument that you're not right. And we're seeing it
with guns. Yes.
Yeah, with guns and the full force of regulation, and that's exactly what you're seeing right now. Like logic, laws, precedent be damned. They're going to do what they're going to do. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah, I agree. That's true, and I like how laws work like that. In Estonia, in the constitution, for instance, we have this like nice line that says gender-based discrimination is not allowed to be like implemented in laws.
Yeah.
But then we have the military draft law that says that this only applies to men, and the second line is this is not in conflict with the constitution that says that this shouldn't be allowed. And just sometimes laws are very flexible, and who cares? Apparently, they're words.
Yeah, this is scary to me. I think to get a little somber is like, if this is the road we're going to go down, where you can do this, it's not just bad for crypto. It's bad for society, in my humble opinion. It's bad for tech in general. It's bad for entrepreneurs. It's bad for inventors. It's bad for people who want to create things, because we've never put the liability on these people for all potential uses of what they create, right? So, in an extreme example, like, would you, the maker of an automobile, right? Are you going to say because people used it inappropriately, they knocked down a gate, or they used it to ram somebody, that you're responsible because you created the automobile and somebody wielded it
I have an even closer example to give you, which is, let's say you are the developer of a open source library that a bunch of other developers use in order to build their own software. This is very normal in open source software. A lot of software developers depend on the work of others, and those other people don't care what you necessarily do with that code. So here's like the question. Is any software developer not shielded by publishing it under a company personally liable for any way that their code is integrated into somebody else's code that might be malicious? I think that's a very realistic question that emerges from this, is we are essentially punishing somebody for writing code, not for the Korean, state, not for the North Korean state. They just wrote some code on Ethereum that some people use to make transactions when they don't want the recipient to know, who it was. For example.
Well, how about this for an example? We keep doing this. TCP, right? The protocol that the internet is built on. Now that's obviously open source. Like, so every bad thing that happens on the internet can be traced back to the people who coded this protocol. Like, it's an insane precedent. We cannot abide by it. It'll be very interesting to see how this plays out. What an interesting week in ReFi and macroeconomics. Totally. Very momentous. What was the saying? It's like years pass by and nothing happens, and then like a week goes by and years happen. I butchered that one.
Oh no, that's crypto on like a monthly basis. I just said that to the people over at Solid World today when we were discussing these things of. Well, you can't say that crypto is boring. There is just always the craziest thing happening somewhere. You maybe just haven't heard about it yet, but every week you get to go like, oh, what the fuck,
And I love it.
Yeah, I also love it. Yeah.
All right,
it's very fresh. It's very dynamic. Stuff keeps happening. Well, yeah, we'll probably have a follow-up on this next week and see how that's played out.
We'll be arrested.
It's going to be weird, yeah.
You and I are going to be arrested.
For talking about it.
Yeah, for talking about it. Rez, final question, and this is probably the most important one of the day.
Oh, no, not bench pressing question, please. Let's skip that.
We'll catch you all on the next one. Remember to ape responsibly. Peace, dudes and dudettes.